Chairman of the Diego Martin Corporation, Mrs. Susan Hong, my cabinet colleague, the Member of Parliament for Diego Martin Northeast, who holds the portfolio of Minister of Finance, my other cabinet colleague, Member of Parliament for Diego Martin Central, who holds the portfolio of Minister of Sport and Youth Affairs, my other cabinet colleagues who are here tonight, members of the Senate who are visiting Diego Martin Central, members of the Diego Martin community, visitors, and the many tens of thousands of you who are at home listening to this broadcast. I want to thank you for the attention, particularly those of you who have taken time to come out and to listen, and hopefully to learn what we are about and to be better able to resist the winds of unreasonableness, malice, and mischief, which seem to want to dominate the environment in Trinidad and Tobago. But I say, as leader of the government, that we operate on the basis that the vast majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago are decent, right-thinking, sensible people who want the best for themselves, their family, and their country, and who will listen to reason and truth at all times. Tonight, let me respond to a gentleman who spoke there a while ago about the government's exposure of wrongdoing in its early days, and up to now, nobody has been held accountable. First, let me make it clear. The cabinet is not the police service in Trinidad and Tobago, and we will be locking up no one. However, if there is evidence of wrongdoing which can be pursued by the government of Trinidad and Tobago, rest assured that we will, and I dare say we are, pursuing those lines of inquiry. And I want to repeat what I said at an earlier time, that the wheels of justice turn slowly, very slowly, but they do turn. I say no more on that matter tonight. But let me just deal with the undisputed facts of our circumstance. Because you see, there are other voices in this free society where people express their views, and it is by the expression of their views that you really know where they stand, what they represent, what they will support, what they will not support, and so on. So it might not have been a bad thing for people to have been allowed the opportunity, or to have taken the opportunity that they might have seen to express themselves on the matter before us tonight. This whole matter of the application of the Property Tax Act. We, as a government, remember, this is not the first government of Trinidad and Tobago. We've had governments before. We've had circumstances before. I came from a rural community in this country, in Tobago. I grew up as a child in Tobago, when a lot of people like myself, we survived on the economy of the day. It used to be cocoa, but the cocoa industry was wiped out by witch's broom. We used to export large amounts of cocoa, and that was the major income of many families in Trinidad and Tobago. Today, the cocoa industry is but a shadow wherever it exists. It used to be coconuts, where we produced copra for food oil. Today, as a result of disease, where you can't replant estates, and where the trees have not died, they are very, very old, and the production is very low, and coconut production in this country is largely for fresh coconuts. The copra industry is virtually non-existent. But there was a time when that was the basis of our economy. It used to be sugar. Then, of course, you know what happened with the sugar industry in Trinidad and Tobago. It eventually was closed in 2002 because we lost our market, and even so, sugar had failed to be able to provide us with the kinds of income that we became accustomed to. And that sort of situation, the agricultural environment, the agricultural economy of Trinidad and Tobago, pretty much disappeared at the end of the 60s, into the 70s. But by that time, when oil was about $3 a barrel or something like that, and we didn't own the industry. We used to get a little pittance from the energy industry. But then, two things happened. And it didn't happen here in Trinidad and Tobago. The main thing happened in the Middle East, which caused the price of oil to jump from where it was in single digits to about $20 a barrel, and suddenly we became rich. And suddenly, you started to observe what the government of the day was doing, which was spending money, doing all those things we dreamt of doing that we couldn't do because as a country we couldn't afford it, even after independence. The national budget used to be $300 million. And that was when you had the politics being standpipe politics. Because when you open a standpipe was such a big developmental item that the politicians would gather there to get the political benefit of a standpipe. Today's standpipe politics is a derisive term. However, we made do, and we were people who were better behaved, and we still maintained a vision of a future for ourselves and our children. Then came another development, the period of the oil boom in the 70s, when the OPEC cartel decided to extract more money for oil. We just happened to be a small oil producer. And then we had what we called an oil boom because so much money came into the country that we hadn't been accustomed to. And then we set about to build more schools, build more roads, build more hospitals, buy an airline, do a lot of things, including building industries in Point Lisas that we didn't have before. All of these things that happened, largely as a result of external developments, caused us to be enjoying a quality of life that we have become accustomed to. So our children now who don't know our history, and I dare say most of them don't know it because it's not taught in our schools, part of the deficiency of our existence. They take it for granted that what they saw last year is how it has always been. But you see, when you talk about the development that is done in this country as a result of these economic circumstances, some people tell you, don't say that, because if you say that, you might be talking about the PNM's programs. But I'm not talking about that tonight. I'm talking about the country's ability to sustain the standard of living that we had become accustomed to. So, we then now have a parliament, and in the parliament you have people who run the country. On one side the government, the other side the opposition. But I dare say, all of us took an oath of office in the parliament, especially those of us who are cabinet ministers. And it is for good reason why there's an oath of office, especially that oath taken by ministers of government. And the oath said that you are required to act without fear or favor, malice or ill will. And the others who are not ministers, they take an oath. If they didn't take it, they couldn't sit down in the parliament. But of course, we don't expect that they will assist the government to remain in office. But this is not about remaining in office. This is about the survival of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And it's a good thing that the government is not confused. Because if the government was confused, the circumstances would have been far different, far worse. What's the opposition saying about this tax? One voice, the shadow minister of finance, is saying it's a waste of time because it will not collect any significant revenue. Well, if that is the case, why are you bothered about it? It has to be a minor matter if it wouldn't collect any significant revenue. But then his leader comes out and says it is draconian and it is meant to pauperize the country. So they want to get another slogan. Remember, Axe the Tax? That created a political party, which is a one-man show, the Prakash show. Now it is the poverty tax. And if it's the poverty tax, it's meant to oppress poor people. But of course, on the same platform, it's a big shot party and only catering for the big shots. Where is the level of foolishness going to end? But of course, as Patrick Manning used to say, they had to say something. It doesn't have to make sense, but they have to say something. But you see, you've got to be careful what they're saying. Because some of them, what they're saying is detrimental to the national well-being. I have one called Ramdeen. He was down in Macaulay recently, and let me quote for you his response to this tax. I want to read it off my phone because I got a picture of it. I'm quoting here from the Newsday of Tuesday, May 2nd. And I'll just take you to the part that I want to mention. Ramdeen told the gathering it should be of concern to every owner of property whether residents living in other parts of the country would not be evaluated as well. Quoting him, will they evaluate properties in Laventille and in Beetham? He said the people of Pinal, Pointe-à-Pitre, and Chaguanas spent years developing their properties for generations, and this government will now come and say pay tax or you will lose your property. That is the response of the opposition in Trinidad and Tobago. That, Mr. Ramdeen, is a racial dog whistle. We understand exactly what you're saying. A tax that survived as a law where your government was in office for 5 years, gave amnesties on it. But on the last day, in 2014, December, I think it was, they ended the amnesty, which means that the tax came back into force, was collectible and due, and by extension, that if they had won the election, they would have collected the tax. But he sees this as something affecting the people in Pinal, Chaguanas, and Pointe-à-Pitre. Tonight, Mr. Imber told you it affects you here in Diego Martin too. And it affects every owner of property across Trinidad and Tobago because that's the law. That's the law. And we in the government could only have been in the government because we took that oath of office to uphold the law, and the law applies to every owner in Trinidad and Tobago under this property tax. And I wish that they would just end the insult to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And if they want to stay and tell people in their constituencies who they represent, who they should lead to be law-abiding citizens, to be less than that, then that is for them and their representation. But we will appeal to the entire population of Trinidad and Tobago. And let me say something about this. You're going to lose your property if the government enforces the law of property tax, which incidentally, we said we will do in the campaign of 2015. We told you in 2015 that coming into office, we will collect the tax because the tax is due and is needed. We told you in the budget of 2016 and of 2017. In fact, in the budget of 2017, they were criticizing the Minister of Finance for failing to carry out his promise to collect it. You remember that? Because you see, there are a number of things you have to do based on what had happened before. And we are doing those things to be in a position to collect the tax. We're not bringing back any tax. We're not initiating any tax. This has reached the stage where it is the law. And all we are doing is collecting taxes based on the existing law. But I was about 17 and a half. I was still in school, the year of my A-levels, when my grandfather told me that he had nothing to give me except the parcel of land on which we live. And he was fearful that the rest of my family would challenge me when he was gone. He said, I'll take you down to Kelly's office. Kelly was a law firm in Tobago. I'll take you down to Kelly's office and you'll sign the deed. And my grandfather gave me a deed when I was a teenager for my property in Tobago. And I immediately became a taxpayer. $1.44 per year. But even then, up to now, where I own much more valuable property, I always knew from that day that if I didn't pay that $1.44, I could lose that parcel of land that my grandfather bequeathed to me. So where did it come from that if you don't pay your tax, government going to take your property? And then to insult you, a member of parliament who was in the government for 5 years under this tax, failed to collect the tax, is saying to you that he went to Florida and buy a property there. And it's only when he realized that he could lose it there if he didn't pay the tax. And he saw the same clause in the law of Trinidad and Tobago, and he now is the champion fighting for people here because they could lose their property. When they were in government, they thought you were foolish. Now that they're in opposition, they thought you are the things with long ears. But it's the same approach, that you don't have any sense. So he had to go to Florida to buy a property, to be compliant with American law without murmur, to be motivated to be a champion in Trinidad and Tobago about property tax. I am not surprised that there are voices against this tax. Many of them come to lobby me as Prime Minister, hoping that I would influence the cabinet away from it. But when I look at who is talking, I know why they're talking about it and talking to me. Because you see, Mr. Imbert pointed out to you the graduation and the graduated scale of the tax. Could you imagine a person who had a liability of, let's say, $2 million a year in taxes because they had property of a huge value, which would attract that $2 million tax? And then 2011, they paid none. 2012, they paid none. For 5 years, they paid none. So that tax, which should have been paid into the treasury, went into their pocket. You expect them to be beating any band and jumping up in front and waving any flag for the tax? Now, let's be serious. If you had 4 houses, none of which is on the roll, but your neighbor is on the roll and your neighbor is paying his or her tax, but you're not paying any. You have 4 houses. You know what you do? You call the Prime Minister and tell him how you could do that. If you bring in this tax, I go have to pay. And I'm saying you only will have to pay because you own. And somebody in the last lady, or the second to last lady who spoke tonight, she raised the question that she's living on, I think, state land, and she has a letter of comfort. Recently, I was asked by somebody on the way out of a function, what is the situation with squatters? Which is a very valuable question, because a lot of people in this country, I think it is said that 25% of the households in this country are people in the status of squatters. So they are not non-entities, they are a significant part of the household. When I was asked what would be their situation, I saw in the papers that the Prime Minister said they got to pay tax. Now, the Prime Minister is not taxing anybody. It is the law that says who have to pay tax. I saw Ramdeen and his friend telling people, don't pay the PNM no tax. PNM coming to do this and PNM coming to do that. It is the law. It's not a PNM law. It's the law of Trinidad and Tobago. And in this case, the law specifically says that this measure apply to the owners of property. So if you view yourself as an owner of property, the law applies to you. If you are not an owner of property, then it will not apply to you. So this answers the question about what is going to happen to those persons who are struggling to make ends meet, but who are renting from the HDC. Well, because you are an HDC tenant, you are not an owner, and therefore this law doesn't apply to you. The owner of the property is the HDC, and the HDC will take care of that issue. If you take a mortgage from the HDC and you bought a house, you're into a mortgage, you still owe some on the mortgage, but you own the property. You are an owner, so then the law will apply to you. So I said to the person who asked me the question about squatters, it's an interesting conversation that should take place in this country. Because when it is time to lay claim to the land, you lay claim that you are an owner on the basis that you've been there under another law which says that if you've been there for 15 years or whatever, then you have interest in, you're the owner and nobody could put you off. But then when comes time to pay the tax that says owners must pay, you're not an owner. And that's what I said, but that's an interesting conversation. And I would like to see it, because anybody who really wants to be an owner who is in a squatter situation, you should be glad to pay the tax. Because what that does, it cements your position of ownership on that land. Because if you are saying I'm not the owner and I have no interest in this land, then suppose a situation arises when you're challenged. And then you'll go and say, I've been here for 30 years and I have rights on the land under law, so and so and so, and I'm the owner of this piece of land. You can't be fish and fowl. So it depends on what status the squatter takes on the piece of land that you're accepting, because the law only applies to owners. Let me just spend a couple of minutes talking about this credit rating matter. You see, we have had to borrow. When we had a lot of money coming in, Mr. Imbert gave you some frightening numbers tonight about how much money we are no longer getting from the source of our revenue. Because two facts should remain central and in front of all of us here in Trinidad and Tobago. Two things. One, it is the government revenues that drives the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. That's a fact. If the government doesn't spend in this country, the economy collapses. And the majority of people working for the government in one way or the other, or working for some agency, even in the private sector, that depends on government spending. And the government gets that spending from revenues coming from the energy sector. So it's a major government contribution to the economy and a major contribution from the energy sector. That elevated us to a standard of living where we have tens of thousands of persons working for the state on the government payroll, public service and otherwise, or in the public enterprise sector. We have a lot of people who can't even remember what their water rate is, or even their light bill. Some people don't bother to remember how much to put in their pocket to fill their tank, even though the prices have been increasing recently. And of course, you go into the hospital and you demand the MRI and all the medication and all the doctors and the nurses because it's a right. And of course, you want the roads fixed and you want the mosquitoes killed and you want that standard of living, including easy and uninterrupted access to foreign exchange to travel as and when you wish. That is what we have become accustomed to. That is the quality of our life. But because we have not got the revenues to sustain it, and we are trying to sustain it largely without too much lowering of that standard, we have been borrowing money to pay the bills to maintain roughly the standard of living that we have become accustomed to, even though the revenues have fallen as significantly as Mr. Imbert has said. So we're borrowing. But we have to be cautious, like you have to be cautious in your own home budgeting. If you find yourself with a job that pays less now than the one you had 2 years ago, but you keep on spending at the same rate, and you take out bank loans or borrow from the neighbor or somebody on the job, there will come a day when you won't be able to borrow, and you will find yourself worse off than if you had managed your affairs, manage your borrowing, reduce your borrowing to something manageable. Now, credit rating doesn't apply in any large measure to you being able to borrow, in the country or sometimes even outside. What credit rating does is to tell the lender what is your position with respect to being able to repay any money you borrow. That's what the credit rating is. I don't know if you all remember recently, the United States had suffered a downgrade. And the United Kingdom. And big industrial countries have suffered downgrades. It doesn't mean that they're gone broke or their outlook is bleak. It meant that a measure of their ability to service their debt is expressed by agencies that look at your spending pattern, your earning pattern, and determine your ability to pay any debt. So when your ability is put in A or A minus, it means that you have really no problem in paying back debt, so they rush to lend you money. And as the world is not flat and not even leveled, interestingly enough, a person or a country in that situation that could repay its debt very easily gets to borrow more cheaply. And then, of course, if something happens with your revenues and it appears as though you may struggle to repay, and God forbid that you have an inability to pay where you default, then these rating agencies send a signal that you have been not having the kinds of revenues to support further borrowing, or the risk in lending you money is very great because you may not be able to repay when you're called upon to repay. Countries have defaulted. Argentina defaulted on their debt because they had borrowed and their revenues had fallen, and they got to a point where they could not pay the debt and they defaulted. Now, we don't want to end up anywhere near that. On the other hand, if you don't have the revenues to pay for the basics that a country must have, starting with medicine, or let me reverse that, starting with servicing the debt that you have incurred, because the first charge on any money we earn as a country goes to paying the public debt. Are you aware of that? The first charge goes to pay the public debt, means money that you have borrowed and spent. When you get money in your hand now, the first thing you're required to do with that money is to pay the debt. And that is why you need to keep the size of your debt in focus, and don't borrow too much to maintain a standard of living which is not warranted based on the revenue stream that you have. And then, of course, the second call is medicine for the hospital and paying the staff in the hospital. Because say what you want about other demands, if you feel pain as a result of any injury or any affliction, everything else takes second place. First place is service at the hospital and medicine to treat your injury or your affliction. And then, of course, you need to have children in school, and you need to ensure that certain national security issues are looked after. And so it goes. So when they look at us as a country, and they see what we're spending money on, and they see what our revenues are, they will determine where our credit ratings stand, our ability to pay debt as against spending within the country. All those who had a lot to say about the credit rating, especially those who just came out of government and are now suddenly very bright and know all that is wrong with the country. So in the last 18 months, this country got so different. They know what the story is. But there's a condition that they're very silent on. What are the options? What is the alternative? They were asking us in the parliament, what are you borrowing money for? Why are you borrowing? Now they're saying, oh, we have been downgraded, as if they don't know that if you lost $20 billion in revenue you had 2 years ago and don't have now, that downgrade is a possibility. Because what this government should have done, well, now forget Ralph Marr, let me go take another drink. But what this government could have done in the last 18 months to have so reversed the condition that we would not have been downgraded or we would have been upgraded. What? Tell me what? That conversation is one of silence. And let me tell you why it's one of silence. Had we done what the classroom experts say to do, we could have avoided being downgraded. And let me tell you why. I brought some numbers here for you. In the last, between 2014 and 2016, between 2014, here it is, because we came in September 2015. Between 2014 and 2016, we subsidized water to the tune of $6 billion. And that is why your water rate is where it is today. And that is why in another country in the Caribbean, your water rate would have been quite different, because they didn't have the ability from revenue side to subsidize their water. So virtually every house is metered in that country, and they pay water at the cost of production with a profit for the agency. But in Trinidad and Tobago, from government revenues based on a time when we had more money. We were spending approximately $2,000 million a year to keep WASA running, bad as the services. All over Trinidad today, there's no water here, no water there, no water. That's another story I'll deal with another time. But in terms of cost to the taxpayer, $6,000 million between 2014 and 2016 to keep WASA going. And of course, the petroleum subsidy, which we have taken down a little bit, between the same period, 2014 and 2016, we subsidized fuel to the tune of almost $13 billion at an average of over $4 billion a year. UWI, $2 billion, it's costing us $2 billion in that same period. UTT, $1.2 billion. So between these two universities, it's costing the revenue, the treasury, $3.2 billion just to operate those two institutions. The social programs, which we have not in any way drastically cut in this country. We've removed some straightforward corrupt practice in the Ministry of Social Development. And we've taken issue with some spending patterns right down to Carnival. Remember the Carnival Bacchanal? Right. In that whole back of social programs, which involve URP, old age pensions, CPEP, payment to persons who are challenged, all the social programs in that same period, 2014 to 2016, the Treasury, cost the Treasury $12 billion. The GATE program in that period, averaging $660 million a year for a total of $1.98 billion. The public service wage bill in that same period, 2014, $6 billion. 2015, $7.4 billion. 2016, $7.1 billion for a total of $20.7 billion to maintain the public service payroll. A simple one that you take for granted in the news recently. We don't want this and we don't want that and we not accept. That's a $250 million subsidy for the inter-island ferry. Now, we have options. And one of the options would have been to cut this expenditure in any of these areas. Cut the expenditure in WASA, the subsidy. And how do you do that? You increase water rates. And the same thing at TNT. And you saw how we cut the petroleum subsidy. Could do that and do more. UWI, children go to university, basically at no cost. We could introduce changes there. We made some changes with the GATE program, remember that? And we are now going to administer that program on the basis of means test. Public service wage bill. You know how Barbados dealt with this problem in Barbados with the public service wage bill? They sent home 3,000 workers. 3,000 workers. We have not used a policy of cutting the public service like that to reduce the revenue. What we have done is not increase the public service. We have not renewed certain contracts which have been improperly put in place in many instances. Because in this period of difficulty, we want to maintain an opportunity for persons to be employed, even if it means that we have to keep our debt profile high, at least for a period as we work towards the soft landing of the economy. But of course, you will hear the leaders of some of the unions saying that the government is this and the government is that. It is the government of Trinidad and Tobago treating with the government situation. If we find there is waste or obsolescence in the public service or in the public enterprise sector, then we have a duty to deal with it. It's part of the responsibility. And of course, we wouldn't dream of cutting the subsidy to the inter-island ferry, because that is the lifeline to Tobago. But had we made drastic cuts in these areas, then the rating agencies would have looked very favorably on us, and we would have got a credit rating maintenance or even an upgrade saying that we are in a better position to service our debt because we are not spending that amount of money on the things I just outlined to you there. But I said to you, as leader of the government, as the PNM leader, that while we face this threat of not being able to fund the quality of our life at the level at which we become accustomed to, that we will make the downward changes in such a way that we can manage it, and we'll take our own medicine. And I gave you the assurance that we will not end up in the arms of the IMF, which is where you end up when you are not able to manage your affairs. And we have been managing the affairs of this country in such a way that we are making the downward adjustments without collapsing the economy and over-pressuring the population. And if we have done nothing well, we have done that well, and that is why Trinidad and Tobago today is viewed as stable even in the financial circles. You see, in the classroom at UWI, 2 plus 2 always equal 4. And if you need to bring the economy into balance, the revenue is 47 billion, or is it 37? 37 billion, and you have been saddled with a $57 billion lifestyle. Just cut out 20 billion. That is for UWI classroom. Because after the class, the students leave and the teacher go home. But if the government does something like that, what are you going to do to and with the people who are affected by that $20 billion cut now that you've balanced the budget where revenue is 37 billion, expenditure is 37 billion, you don't have to borrow, and all are we hunky-dory? Well, if you want to know what bacchanal is, you try carrying out that advice and that policy in Trinidad and Tobago. Because nobody elected this government to destroy the lives of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. What you elected us to do is to administer the affairs of state within our ability as a nation to continue to have faith and boundless faith in our destiny, that we can borrow, we can reduce our expenditure slowly, we can work on growing the revenue, and we can behave ourselves properly and not be a corrupt government in any environment, and you get the best out of it, and at the end of the day, this will bring us with the light at the end of the tunnel. So all the advice you're hearing on the down credit rating and on the borrowing, nobody's coming out and saying, cut the public service by 10,000 people. Because no politician in Trinidad will say that. Somebody in UWI will say it because they're safe inside there. Raise the water rate by 30%. Oh, as for devaluing the dollar, another story. Devalue the dollar. Make it 10 to 1. In fact, there are some people who are hoarding the central bank injection into the economy, hoping for a devaluation. And they will tell you, in fact, very early in the game, that was only at first advice we got. Now, I'm not saying that devaluation is a bad or impossible thing. But the same way the IMF is a lender of last resort, so is the devaluation when all else fails. But if you can manage to bring down our expenditure, with the dollar floating in the way it has up to a level that the Minister of Finance said that we'll allow it to go between 660 and 685? Yeah. And if you're doing that, and you're not required then to devalue, because they say there are serious downsides to devaluation, you know. It is not arithmetic. Because if you, let me just give you a little example. And Mary King put it out today in a paper. Because you see, some of the advisors who are advising you, let me just tell you, there's a lot of bad advice out there, you know. The bulk of our revenue comes from the energy sector. Oil companies pay us money. And they pay for goods and services in this country. What do you think is going to happen when you devalue the dollar? All it means is that less US dollars will be converted to TT dollars to pay for the services inside here. So it will take less US dollars into our economy to do the same thing that they were doing before. So when you think that you are solving the shortage of US dollars coming into the economy, the devaluation might shorten it further. That's the advice you're getting. As not to mention the other downsides to the devaluation. Because of course, the same people who are telling you devalue the dollar will be at the front of the line shouting, inflation going up. A tin of milk was $5, is now $10. Oh God, Rowley bad, the PNM bad. They will never tell you that the advice that they were giving, that would have been an automatic outcome. So we listen to all the advice, and at the end of the day, we make what we consider to be in the best interest under the circumstances for all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Imbert gave you some examples a while ago. But let me tell you something he told me when he became government. We came into government on the 9th of September, 2015. Last week, there was a gentleman on the UNC platform, a former governor of the central bank, who we have summarily dismissed when the Minister of Finance reported to the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago that he had lost confidence in the governor of the central bank. That was the information I received. And the Minister of Finance was required to put the case to the cabinet, and he did so. And the cabinet unanimously agreed that the governor of the central bank must be dismissed. And he was summarily dismissed. Because we operate on our oath of office to act without fear, without favor, without malice, and without ill will. But before that, something happened. Mr. Imbert reported to me, I think it was 1 week after we were in office, that that gentleman, who was the governor of the central bank, appeared in his office, smiling from ear to ear, to tell him that there was only enough money in the treasury to run the country for 3 days. 3 days. We had just come into government 1 week, and the governor of the central bank walks in to tell the Minister of Finance, we only had enough money to run the country for 3 days. So all those who you hear talking now from the UNC side, that was the state of affairs in Trinidad and Tobago 1 week after they left office. And anytime Ole want them back, Ole could have them back, because I go and mind sheep in Tobago. But he is the one on the platform telling people, as the featured speaker on the UNC platform, not to cooperate with the government because there are other alternatives of getting revenue. And the other alternatives are, according to him, collect the VAT, collect the other taxes. Well, we want all. We want the property tax, we want the VAT, we want the income tax, because the country requires all. And like it was said in England during the war, Trinidad and Tobago expects every man and woman to do his or her duty and to make their contribution as they are able to at their own station. But suddenly they come alive. Prakash was dead and buried, begin to smell. He is now out there. He thinks he sees an opportunity to resurrect himself. And he is now calling on you to be led by him, because he is opposing property tax. If you are fortunate in this Trinidad and Tobago to have been one of those who managed to own a property, consider yourself fortunate. Thank God that you've done it. Thank God for your parents who allow you to inherit it, and make your contribution in the way it ought to be made according to the law of Trinidad and Tobago. That's all we ask of you. That's all we ask of you. And if you are prepared to follow people who are saying to you, don't make your contribution, let others pay it, and you ride the wave, you're one of those who believe that there are easy paths in life. The election is not tomorrow. It's not next week. God willing, the election will be in 2020. And on that day, the PNM will report to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. In the meantime, we observe the law and we carry out the law in Trinidad and Tobago. You see, there will be a lot of voices ready and willing to oppose and attack government action. And one set of action that you will always expect a response from are actions that were unacceptable, sometimes hidden, inherently or totally corrupt. People who have been benefiting from arrangements that worked well for them, don't expect them to say that the government is doing well when we take action to rectify things that are acting in the public interest. But the government has that responsibility. You have no idea how many persons were accessing large sums of public money because of arrangements that were in place which benefited only them. And it might have been done very legally. They have contracts, they have arrangements, but they are doing very well at the expense of the taxpayer. And the only persons in this country who are looking out for the taxpayer are the members of the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago who will make those changes, and of course, we expect to be criticized by those who are the beneficiaries. I won't go into any details tonight. I won't make any specific reference, but suffice it to say that you need to know who the objectors are when they're in the forefront making objections to reasonable action of the government. And what they're saying to us is don't interfere with it. Leave it just so. Don't interfere with it. And it is for us to determine whether we take that advice or make a decision for change. Change for the better in the interest of the wider citizenry. Tonight, I brought with me a document. It was prepared by the Institute of Surveyors of Trinidad and Tobago. And it's called Property Tax 2009 Position Paper. And it's dated April 25th, 2017. I want to read a few paragraphs from it for you. Because you see, Mr. Imbert spoke, and it's quite possible that there are those who believe that what Mr. Imbert said is government propaganda, self-serving, misleading, and so on and so on. But this is from a body of professionals in Trinidad and Tobago. And it says here that the Institute of Surveyors, it is their paper, right? The Surveyors Institute of Trinidad and Tobago was established in 1996 by an amalgamation of the Land Surveyors Association, the Quantity Surveyors Society of Trinidad and Tobago, and the Professional Valuation Surveyors. And it says the Institute is responsible for the development and promotion of the surveying profession and holds a responsibility to the wider public to ensure services rendered in the fields of land, quantity, and valuation surveying are carried out to the highest professional standards by its members. And it goes on in this paper to say, under the heading, a brief history of the property tax system in Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to quote here because you see, parliamentarians who sat on the law for 5 years, who made the law before, even though they voted against it when it came to parliament, but they were part of the parliamentary process. Parliamentarians who took an oath to defend your interests are out there asking you to disobey the law. Don't cooperate with the authorities. That is the kind of parliamentarian we have in Trinidad and Tobago today. Appealing to racial considerations, dog whistle about people in Pinal and people in Chaguanas and what happening in Lavantil and Beetham, dividing us by race and geography. That is the quality of the parliamentarian on the other side. But the land surveyors said, in Trinidad and Tobago, the land and building taxes system has been the longest running taxation system in effect during the 55 years since the Twin Island Republic gained independence from Britain. So we didn't invent this as any PNM oppression, as Kamala is saying. And she's promising you that when she comes back into office, she will abolish it. But when you had 29 seats in the parliament and you mysteriously build a mansion in Philippines, you didn't abolish it. You're going to abolish it when you come back. Well, they ain't coming back here at all. You know, I want you all to ask her how much tax she paid on the mansion in Philippines for the last 5 years. You understand? So you understand why she has a problem with property tax? Because she came into office, took an oath of office to uphold the Constitution and the law. And the law was that you're required to make that contribution in property tax, as Mr. Imbert described to you tonight. You know what she did? She led her cabinet into giving amnesties from which she was a major beneficiary. 5 years. And wants that to be permanent. So when she comes back into office, she will abolish it. And in the meantime, telling people, don't support the government's effort to collect the tax. You understand? And people who are earning large sums of money in property, some of it from the government, there are people who are earning millions of dollars from the government and who should have paid millions of dollars in taxes to the government for the same property. As a result of the actions of Kamla Prasad Bisesa and Prakash Ramadar and that handful of people in the parliament, those millions of dollars were left with the people who the government was paying rent to. In fact, there was one classic case that I came across where the government, in paying the rent to these people, you know, you take into account the tax that you have to pay the government. So one particular property came up for renewal of the rent. And in that negotiation, the government conceded that this tax would be levied because the law was passed. And they got an increase in their rent to deal with this increase in the cost. And guess what? The government paid them an increase on that basis, and they never paid any tax, thanks to Kamla Prasad Bisesa. You could imagine a property where a man owes $10 million a year because he is a wealthy property owner. And for 5 years, he just didn't have to pay any tax. Over and above the profits of his business, he got $50 million in gravy. And of course, what do you expect a man like that to say and do? And what do you expect Mrs. Prasad Bisesa to say? She could never get enough. I thought she had got enough. But the little pittance she owed the state, on the basis that she's the owner of a mansion, she doesn't want to pay that. I own property, and I will be in the forefront of paying the tax as levied on me in Trinidad and Tobago. So this tax is an old tax, a mechanism for raising revenue. You don't want to pay it, but you want fire service. You want police. You want local government. You want school feeding program. You want helicopters in the air. You know how much those helicopters is running up and down there that she was using as a pram? You know how much they cost us? You know how much they cost us? I mean, it breaks my heart to have to approve $200 million for maintenance for a 2-year period to have those helicopters flying, knowing that sometimes the Minister of Finance has to put emergency money into the bills for the hospital. But when she was Prime Minister, Up and down from Philippines to Tobago, helicopter, helicopter, helicopter. I could report to you tonight, I have never sat in a helicopter in Trinidad and Tobago, which belongs to the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And I've always got where I have to go in time. But let me continue with this document. In 1970, the city of Port of Spain and the revenue officers attempted to complete reassessment of properties in the role. But of course, that was not completed, and we continued to use the annual rental values prior to 1969. In 1978, government again determined the real property valuation and tax reform should be revised. A committee was established under the chairmanship of Mr. Randolph Kong, which provided a report, now referred to as the Kong Report. The committee recommended that reform be undertaken by use of the pure site value approach of valuators. You know what that means? In 1978, Chairman Kong and his committee reported that we should use the capital value of property, the same way Prakash paying tax on the capital value in Florida. The Kong report of 78 said to us that we should use that system here. We're not using that. We're not using the value of the property. We're using the estimated rental value. In other words, what it would rent for, as against what the open market value is. Even that was not carried out because we got flush with money in the 70s and we didn't bother to establish that tax. In 1991, the government again became concerned with the property taxation problems following a downturn in the country's economy. It was determined that the cost of services provided by the municipalities to property owners bore little relationship to the revenues received from taxes levied, and significant revenue shortfalls were being experienced. These conditions forced government, through the assistance of the Commonwealth Fund for Technical Cooperation, to retain an expert, a chartered valuation surveyor, to undertake another review of the property tax system. So when Mrs. Prasad Bisesano courts try to give people the impression that you wake up one morning and decide to just brutalize people, nothing is further from the truth. This is an exercise that the country has been going through for decades. So the 1991 effort, a report came out of it entitled Property Taxation in Trinidad and Tobago. And that recommended that the country revalue and reform its system by use of the improved capital value approach to valuation, based on the market value of property as a whole, including land, building, machinery, plant, and equipment. In May 1994, following a comprehensive review by a working group of valuation and administrative experts, Cabinet accepted this proposal. It was decided to use funds under a World Bank technical assistance loan to undertake a comprehensive reform of property tax policy and administration. A pilot effort at a mass reassessment was conducted by the National Economic Research Associates, NERA, a foreign consultant, but the results were not used to implement the reform. So in other words, while the recommendation from the experts after all these studies said, look, use the capital value, the market value, to be the basis for the tax, that recommendation was not implemented in 2009 when the Property Tax Act was enacted. We chose to use the more benign basis of the assumed rental value. And that was introduced with an aim to make provision for the assessment, rating, and taxation of land, and for matters incidental thereto. The act was passed in Parliament, but up comes it, that was 2009, Up comes the general elections, and they voted to axe the tax. Since then, despite being the enacted legislation, the property tax has been ignored, and no property tax revenues have been collected in the country over 6 years. So the man who owed $1 million, he pockets $6 million. The man who owed $10,000, he pockets $60,000. The man who owned a big mall in east, west, north, or south and owed $10 million, he pockets $60 million. That is what has been going on. The present political administration, now this is a paragraph from the surveyors. I'm reading from the surveyors document. The present political administration assumed office in 2015 and has rekindled the drive to reform the property tax system with the Property Tax Act of 2009 at its core. The drive has been spurred on and to some extent justified by the extended plummet of oil prices, which has crippled the economy's main source of foreign exchange and income. If there ever has been a more prudent time to review and update the property taxation system of the country, it is now. Let me repeat that. Because while you hear what you heard from the opposition, this is the position of the Institute of Surveyors of Trinidad and Tobago. If there was ever a time, a more prudent time, to review and update the property taxation system of the country, it is now. That is the position of this professional body, and that is the position of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. They went further, and they did, according to the law, work out some examples of how the tax will apply. Now, this is not the government. This is the body of surveyors, the valuers, the quantity surveyors, and the land surveyors working together and put their professional stamp on this document. Residential property. And here this example. For a home with an estimated monthly rental value of $3,500, and I'm sure many of you in this room could envisage what kind of property would rent for, or that you have to pay $3,500. And that is the annual rental, $3,500 a month. So the annual, meaning the 12 months of the year, rental value, meaning what the landlord will get if he rents at that, is $42,000. So you establish that figure. That is not the tax. That is the basis on which the tax would be determined. The law then deducts 10% from that and brings the annual taxable value to $37,800. That is not the tax. That is the taxable value on which the tax would be levied. The tax law says you will take 3% of that $37,800, and therefore your property tax is $1,134, a monthly sum of $94.50. That is the law. That is the calculation done by the surveyors. Where the UNC and the supporters getting these lies from, and why are they insulting the population hoping to prosper by it? They went on to do an example of a commercial property with an estimated monthly rental of $10,000 a month, meaning that the annual rental is $120,000. After deducting 10% for voids, you bring the annual taxable value to $108,000. And since commercial properties are taxed at 5%, as compared to residential that is taxed at 3%, the tax that that owner will have to pay is $5,400. A monthly, and that's for the year, and that means for the month, they will pay $450. So here it is. You're renting a property. Government supplying all the support for you. If you see smoke come out the kitchen, you ball fire. You see somebody you don't like, you call the police. But you have a problem with paying $450. A pothole in the road. A gang comes to fix the pothole outside the road. That $450 for the year can't even pay one man in the gang. We go on to deal with agricultural property because somebody tonight raised the question, a young lady here who I think is very well put, she mentioned she has agricultural property with land, agricultural land with a structure and land without. Listen to the example worked out by the surveyors. And they say the annual taxable value on agricultural property is calculated to be 2% of the estimated market value of the property. In the case of an agricultural property with a market value of $600,000, the annual taxable value would therefore be $12,000. That is not the tax. That is the annual taxable value determined by the market value. And then you take 1%. The annual property tax liability is $120. $120 for the year. That is $10 a month. But you have the country's official opposition, the country's parliamentarians out there telling people that this tax will impoverish people. The last time I heard, a bygone was how much? They're selling one zabuka for $40. But you have a problem in paying $10. People of Trinidad and Tobago, get with the program. Don't disturb and upset yourself by people who are telling you foolishness. This tax is structured to ensure that there is no pressure on persons on agricultural land. They worked out another example. Industrial machinery housed in a building. The annual taxable value is calculated by law at 6% of the installed cost of the plant and machinery, plus the cost of structures within which they are housed. In the case of an industrial property with a total installed cost of $3 million, the annual taxable value is $180,000. And 6%, the annual tax liability at 6% is $10,800. That is on a $3 million commercial property, machinery house. The monthly charge there is $900. And that will prevent businesses from being profitable in Trinidad and Tobago. And they would leave the country and they will destroy the economy because you ask them to pay $900 a month on a $3 million property, which has to be secured by the fire service, by the police, by local government, and all the services that they demand. Industrial machinery, not housed in a building, valued at $3 million. Same formula you use, 3% on that type of tax, on that situation, at 6% of the annual taxable, you get a liability of $5,400 for a monthly charge of $450. Vacant residential land, because some of you may have plots of land on which you haven't built on yet. For a parcel of vacant residential land, the valuation division may estimate its capital value. Let's say that land is worth $400,000. That's the example they use here. And you have an idea, people, of what kind of land would be valued at $400,000 or $300,000 or $600,000. Because sometimes you want to buy, you know what to have to pay. They use a piece of land that is valued anywhere in the country at $400,000. At 3.5% of the capital value, the annual taxable value is $14,000. So you establish the base for the tax. At 3% then of this $14,000, the tax liability on this piece of land which you own, and which you should own proudly, because you are one of the fortunate people who own a piece of this territory. $420. A monthly sum less than a Carib, $35. Less than $35. Less than the price of a bottle of beer. And you upsetting the country up, down, and across, and threatening to ruin the country. Disturbing the equilibrium. Upsetting children going to bed. Wasting time in the media. Nasting of the TV screen. Because property tax coming to kill all of we. You know what coming to kill all of we? The legacy left there by Kamla Prasad Bisesa and her cohorts. You see, you hear them saying, or she is in the forefront saying, we never raised any taxes. We there for 5 years and we didn't raise, sure you didn't raise any taxes. But what you did, you raided the reserves inside the NGC without going through the parliament. When they came into office, they met the NGC with 16 or more billion dollars in the bank. And outside of the budgeting process, they just draw it down and spend it. So while this Minister of Finance doesn't have that luxury nor that inclination, because as it happened in the Patrick Manning era, that the Patrick Manning government did not do that, this government will not and must not do that. And we can't do it even if we want to do it, because in a 24-month period, they draw down 15 or 16 billion dollars from the NGC. So happy were they to spend that money that they went on a program to upgrade playing fields in their constituencies. You remember the famous NGC map which showed the constituencies, and they were spending money in UNC constituencies. Remember that story? And they had a program on TV. When they spend and spend till they couldn't find nothing to spend on, they start a program funded by the NGC called What is Happiness? Paid millions of dollars for a program asking you what is happiness. They were so happy thieving and spending government money, they thought you were happy too. So they were asking you, you know what happiness is? And today they have the unmitigated gall to want to advise this government as to what to do and what not to do. I told you all before, and I'm telling you again tonight, we are taking no advice from the UNC and those who put us in this situation. Had that $16 billion been there, when oil price dropped to $29 and it's now struggling at $48, and we get $5 or $6 less than that, had that money been available now, we wouldn't have had to go into the stabilization fund. We could have used that money at about $2-3 billion a year for a 2 or 3 year period and not have to do that. And when we use the stabilization fund for the purpose for which the fund was put, you know, they're asking us why we borrowing money and why we using the fund. And you know, there are some people in this country listening to them. Well, those of you who are listening to them, if you are a public servant, would you prefer a few thousand of you being laid off? Those of you tonight, a gentleman got up here and asked, is this Kali, might have been Kali Akibi, or was it you? Talk about small contractors owed money. We would love to pay them, and we are paying them, and you made a suggestion that we try and clear up those small sums that we owe to contractors. We are trying to do that, and we'll do more of it to try. We know we owe that debt. But a lot of it is debt incurred by the outgoing government. Most of the money that we got in the first year, we had to spend clearing out that kind of thing. There's one contractor which has the government in court for over $1 billion owed to the contractor. Ask yourself, what kind of government was going on in Trinidad and Tobago where a contractor is owed $1.2 billion? And the government in the opposition now saying, pay the contractor, pay the contractor. That will be paid in the court. That matter is in the court. And the government is defending your interests. A man walked in my office one day and he said he's owed money. He said, and could I intervene for him to be paid? I said, well, what were you owed money for? He said, I was building lots for the EMBD. What lots you build? I had a contract to do 1,000 lots. I said, how much have you done? Well, you paid. Well, I've done over 800 and I'm owed X amount of money. I was stunned because I had heard about EMBD. EMBD is a company that had no revenue. And just before the election, under the tutelage of Moonlal and others, they went, talking about borrowing, they went in the bank, borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars and just give it to the EMBD. And the EMBD just distributed it. That is no police work. That is police work right now. And those of you who call in for the action of the government, there will be action. The wheels of justice turn, but they turn very slowly. But you know, they are the ones talking about borrowing and spending. They were so lablash with NGC money. They come up in Beatam and spend over $1 billion on a project that was largely not needed. The project is there now in the court. Contractor run away. You understand what we're dealing with? And you understand why in May of 2017, you could look back on Trinidad and Tobago as we are going through this very difficult period. One thing is a fact, that we are the government of Trinidad and Tobago at a time when the revenues are down. At a time when we are required as a government to reduce expenditure. Nobody likes to pay tax, but we all are required to make contributions by way of tax. Whether it's property tax, income tax, corporation tax, VAT, that is how the country is serviced. Especially now when the revenues from the rents and the oil and gas sector has fallen the way they have fallen. People of Trinidad and Tobago, you are sensible people. You are worthy people. We are going through a difficult period now. And the one good thing you have going for you is a stable, sober, sane, and honest government called the People's National Movement. And as I told some people who make a life of threatening, if they ain't get this and they ain't get that, what they go do and what they ain't go do. The one thing you have going for you in Trinidad and Tobago is a prime minister who is not afraid or is in love with this job. Thank you and good night.